The content you're about to enjoy comes from the archives of The Best You. We're devoted to the very best in personal development, with a platform and resources dedicated to inspiring and changing people's lives. At The Best You, we work with the world's leading writers and trainers on the evolution of the self, and people whose journeys have been affected by their work and words. For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co. Penny Power. Penny is better known for building E-Academy, the first social network for business people created in 1998. It became a global and beautiful online and offline platform for over 650,000 business owners. Along with her husband Thomas, they built this phenomenal community that then was to compete with, obviously, the big platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. She was awarded an OBE in 2014 for the work she did with so many great entrepreneurs, and she's seen as a role model. She's been asked to speak about all sorts of subjects related to entrepreneurship. She's a phenomenal lady with great knowledge and vast expertise. So when Penny speaks, a lot of people listen because, as I said, she's extremely knowledgeable. So enjoy this interview. Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Bernardo Moya and welcome to Inspiring People. Today we're here with Penny Power. Penny is the CEO of Penny Power Limited, who's a company that specializes in digital social media. And she's the founder of E-Academy and Digital Youth Academy. Hi, Penny. How are you?
Very well indeed. Lovely to be here.
Nice to see you. Please tell me a little bit of, tell me about yourself. Introduce yourself, please.
Wow, okay. So I'm 49 soon, and I have 3 children. I've been married for 22 years. I joined the tech sector when I was 19 from school, thinking I'd only do it temporarily because I wanted to work in helping and supporting cerebral palsy and unhappy children. So I was waiting to go to uni and tripped into the tech sector and I've never left it.
And tell me about your earliest memories. Where were you brought up and what was your family environment like?
Very loving, great parents, youngest of 4 children. And my family, my parents and my 3 siblings are all from Scotland. And they moved south just before I was born to Essex. And I was born in Essex. So I spent a majority of my youth having the mickey taken out of me by my entire family, which was interesting because they called me the English Newch. So holidays were spent in Scotland and Christmases and things. And then we moved from Essex when I was 7 across to Berkshire, which is where I grew up.
And what were your parents like?
Well, they're still alive. They're in their 80s now. Great. They're quite closed personalities. They're not very tactile or very open, so they don't go near emotions. But they really good parents, very committed to their children. My mum didn't work apart from some moments when I can remember Labour were in when I was about 12 and tax went up to about 60-70%, so my father found it hard to keep our lifestyle, so my mum started working then for a short time. And just a really committed couple to their family. And my brother's 12 years older than me, so my mum, by the time I was 12, she had been a mum for 24 years, which is quite interesting, actually, when you play that forward. So by the time I was 12, I think she was quite exhausted by the process of being a parent, really, and started needing her own life. So I think at that time, family life shifted quite a lot. My siblings had grown up because I was quite a lot younger than the others, had grown off. But we lived quite rurally, very rurally. My father worked very hard. So I can remember sort of the senior school period of my life not being the happiest, but always felt very loved.
What did your father used to do?
He's a brilliant businessman and a great, very charming. So he was managing director of companies. He was never entrepreneurial, and I find that an interesting concept because somebody told me once, which I don't think I wanted to know this, that not many entrepreneurs, in the first generation entrepreneurs, make their money. it's often second-generation entrepreneurs, which I find really interesting because, I've watched the growth over the last 15 years of entrepreneurs in this country. I think there was about 1 million small businesses 15 years ago. Now there's 4.8 businesses in the country registered. And a lot of those people are having to learn in first generation how to actually be an entrepreneur, which is a very different thing. And I always say I'm an accidental entrepreneur, but that's another story. He was the chairman of the Institute of Directors for his area and the Institute of Marketing. And now, even at 85, he's very involved in politics at a local level and chairs he's just stopped chairing. I think he's called a honorary chairman or something now of 27 constituents for one of the parties.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And what was school like for you?
Culturally, it wasn't a great fit for me. I think I've traded more on my emotional intelligence than my academic intelligence, and the environments at school didn't make me feel very clever. And I didn't like the teaching process. I'm always been a why person, so I've always questioned. And I was at a school where you didn't ask questions; you just did as you were told. So my the junior years were happy years. My senior school years weren't.
Any subjects in particular you liked?
No, it wasn't a good environment for me, school, until I switched at 16 into a sixth form grammar school. I was privately educated at school, and my parents, they worked really hard to private educate us all. And I think that it's interesting about making a choice to private education because it's not only a choice of education, but it's a choice of culture. And the school that we went to, there was a very wealthy school, so it meant that that I was in a set that we didn't really culturally fit, I don't think, into that set because we were a hard-working middle-class family, but majority of my peers came from very wealthy family money and horse riding at weekends, things. That wasn't us. So it was, and the teaching, it was an ex-convent, so we had some nuns there. And they're just cruel, they were just cruel people. Mm. And I laughed a lot, and that wasn't acceptable.
No.
So it wasn't great. But then when I went into the sixth form school, at 16, you could, were given the choice: do you want to go to college or do you want to go back to school? I wasn't ready at 16 to go into a college atmosphere, and so I opted to go to another school. But it was a mixed school, and it was a fantastic school in Newbury, actually, run by a very traditional grammar school headmaster that walks around with a mortar and gown, and a really lovely guy called Basil Cooper. And it was the largest sixth form in the UK at the time, 650 students in the sixth form, which was huge. And there I did a whole year of retakes to get GCA levels at that time. Mm-hmm. And then I did 2 years at sixth form. So I was still in a school uniform at 19.
No.
Yeah, I had a boyfriend that liked that.
I bet he did. And then what happened after that? Did you go to uni? Or?
Well, I had always wanted to be a physiotherapist.
Yeah.
And the reason was that when I was about 11, next door to me in this very remote village in Berkshire, somebody moved in who had a cerebral palsy child called Toby. He was about 6 when I met him, so I was 11. There was an age gap. And I adored him, and he was heavily cerebral palsy. He couldn't feed himself. It was hard to hold his head, couldn't walk. And I used to come home from school and run straight down to Toby and at school holidays spend time with him and always thank his mum, Carol, for letting me come down. And little did I know until later on in my life that I thought, gosh, actually, it must have been quite nice for her. But it didn't feel like that. I felt I got really close to Toby. And in the holidays as I grew up, I used to go and spend holidays in his physiotherapy department, his sort of school that he went to for respite, mm-hmm. and got on really well with the physiotherapists. And they used to say to me, gosh, you'd be brilliant as a physio, and loved it. And there were loads of children. I remember there was a child in a beanbag who couldn't see or hear, so that little girl's emotions was touch, and just stroking her and was lovely. And so I realised that I wasn't uncomfortable in that environment. I loved that environment, and I actually think it was thanks to Toby that I had quite a shift in my self-esteem so So I actually, from the age of 12 to 19, really believed I was going to become a physiotherapist, and started to apply for physiotherapy. But unfortunately, you needed 3 A-levels, and I'd only taken 2 because I'd had to do physics O-level as well, and I had to do physics O-level in a 2-year period. So I just couldn't take on board more than 2 A-levels, and that wasn't enough. I couldn't even get an interview, which was a real bummer. Yeah. Real shock, actually, to me.
So what happened then at the age of 19? You finished school?
Funnily enough, my parents were really shocked, and my mum was really excited about the fact that I wanted to do physiotherapy rather than go into a business environment. And they sent me up to, I remember they sent a huge expense. I mean, this was in 1983. They spent something like £500 on a consultant, a careers consultant, who put me through psychometric tests and interviews all day. And the report came back that I should be a redcoat at Butlins.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God.
Oh, my God. I said, I wonder if I'd taken that advice.
Wow.
I know, it's interesting. But actually, that did intrigue me when I got that. Anyway, I then actually applied to go to university. And I went, applied, and I got a place in London to do psychology, child psychology. Mm-hmm. I thought I'd go that route. And then I'd lost a year, so I left school in the previous July. I've got that, so I had to fill in that gap year, and that's when I worked in a pub in the evenings, and I worked as a welfare assistant in a primary school, helping out with a child who was on the list to go to Borstal, and he was only 7, and it was really sad, and he'd for arson and things, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I was working in this pub in the lunchtime one day, and a lady called Barbara came in, and she was a recruitment consultant. And it was just when Vodafone was opening up in Newbury, and they were just starting, which was amazing, and it was full of them, and she was doing a lot of tech recruitment, and she said, you'd be really good in sales, and she put me forward. I did it. I went to the interview as a favour to her, to an IT company, and they offered me a job, and I said to her, I don't want a job, and she said, look, if you're going to uni, you need to save money. And so I took the job in telesales, and the concept of telesales just didn't feel, it felt really weird to be on the phone with someone. And I went on a 2-day training over Valentine's weekend to Monmouth in Wales, and I remember that was the first time I'd really travelled away from home, and it was really dark and scary, and I was on a course with people who were already employed, and I hadn't ever worked in that environment, and I was listening to all this sort of, it seemed so scientific, this theory of selling, closed and open questions and scripts and everything, and I thought, oh God, this isn't for me. And I came back and I said to this lady, this isn't for me, and she put me on the telesales desk, and we were selling to computer dealers. And we were selling for Hewlett-Packard and all sorts of Microsoft and loads of companies like that, selling to this 5,000 computer dealers in the country. And I used to just pretend to be on the phone. I'd had this list of people I had to proactively cold call, and I used to pretend. And then one day I rang a guy, and he was called Roland Hewlin from Data Systems Electronics in Tolworth, and he had a bad throat, and he was croaky. And I said, oh, you don't sound very well. And I've just started this company, and I don't really know what I'm doing, and I don't think I should bother you. And he said, well, I'm actually about to go home. And I said, oh, well, I'll ring you another day. And then when I was out at lunchtime buying a sandwich, there was a packet of Tunes, coffee sweets, a stand. And I thought about Roland. I thought, I'll buy those, and I'll put them in an envelope to him and say, hope you feel better. There was no agenda to that. That was just me thinking, poor guy, he's not feeling well, that might cheer him up tomorrow. And 2 days later, he rang and he placed a huge order with the business.
Wow.
It was something like £25,000 or something, which was really big in those days. And I remember being lifted up in the hypey telesales environments and taken around this huge order that had come in, biggest of the week or something. And they asked, how did you do it? And I said, I sent him a packet of tunes. And at that point, I switched over, and I thought, actually, it's about relationships and people. It's not about scripts and shit like that. So I just decided to be myself. And then I resigned. I said to them so I started in the February, and I said to them in the September, here's my month's notice, I'm going to uni. And I was hiked up to my boss's boss's boss and said that you were doing really well, why would you leave? And they convinced me. I said, the culture's not me. And they convinced me to stay. And I then did really accelerate. Mm-hmm. I accelerated my career. The industry was on a wave, 1983, through to the night.
So you continued working while you were still at uni?
No, I didn't go to uni.
You didn't go to uni? Oh, okay.
I didn't go. And I left home at 19 and a half or whatever, got a little bed sit, and at 20 and a half, I bought my first flat. And I did. I ended up being sales and marketing director of another large company, quite a large company with 150 million budget when I was 24. So I stayed in that industry.
If you're interested in finding your true purpose, if you're interested in finding your legacy, if you're interested in growing, if you are sick and tired of reading books that don't help you, haven't helped you, or are not helping you, or attending courses and seminars that haven't really had an impact in your life, I invite you to read my book, The Question, Find Your True Purpose, out now. For more information, go to www.thequestion.co. If you're interested in working with me, contributing to the magazine, maybe speaking at any of our many events around the world, partnering or licensing The Best You, go to www.thebestyou.co.
Was that obviously then, that was the turning point in your life, was it? Was it correct to say that that's what took you on the path you're on now?
Took me on the technology path, and I was allowed to be myself, which I met some really revolting people along the way, particularly some nasty women. And I have very strong sisters and a very strong mother. And being the youngest, I sort of always knew, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to them, but I knew when it was best to submit in life. And I realised that I have a problem with women in business where I do submit to strong women, which has always been it's an ongoing problem for me, that I'm quite intimidated by women. So I had some horrible experiences along the way. And so when I met Thomas, my husband, when I was 24, and we got married 26 and then had our daughter when I was 28, I said, all along, I said to Thomas, I didn't want to maintain this career. I wanted to get out of it and start to go back to my original roots of doing something to help people. So when Hannah was born, she and I used to go around. I joined the Stroke Association as a volunteer and used to go to old people's homes and with Hannah and people who had strokes in their homes and talk to them and try and rehabilitate them. And I thought, I'm going to restart my love of that part of me. And then I had Ross and then TJ, so I had 3 children in 4.5 years. And it's an interesting thing for women. I'm not saying intellectually bright, but I'm quite a woman who likes challenges and enjoy interacting with people. I think it was really clear I was missing that, and actually Miss Thomas was missing that part of me, my husband. I think it was obvious, and I think there is a danger. Thomas met me as a sales marketing director of a really go-getter, and I had a nice car and lots of money, and I was jetting around the world at conferences. And then I became a barefoot and pregnant woman. And I think there's a lot he loves about that. But I think I couldn't help becoming that wife that thought, you're 10 minutes late home, and I've been at home with the kids all day, And it's not, I think it's a really big shift in a marriage when that happens, really huge shift. And I felt I can see now that he probably was mourning the me, and because I became my children's mother. And
what was his background?
He's in IT. He loves it, and he comes more from the geek world. He loves technology. He will sit and play with technology, explore technology. I don't. I only see technology as an enabler. So he said to me, I had explored things from home. Like I joined the National Childbirth Trust and was running a little region. And when the kids started at school, I was chairing PTAs. It's really classic, stuff. And he met Michael, a guy called Martin Slagter, who had worked for Michael Dell, running Europe. And Dell used to be one of my biggest clients. Used to buy £1 million worth of HP printers a month from me. And I worked in Bracknell. And he met Martin, and Martin Slagter told him that he had this idea of creating a network of people from home selling computers into the home. And it was when Compaq had just come out with it was the move from the office PC to the home PC. and away from Spectrum and all that, but actually a PC in the home. And Compaq had created this really clever unit that was all in one with a CD drive. And Usborne Books had started to bring out encyclopedias on CD and PB Bear and all these things. And it was about education at home through technology.
Yep.
So he wanted to set up a network of technology friends that would work from home and would go into the home and say, Bernardo, have you considered having a home at PC, and sit with your wife and say this is how your children can interact with education online on the computer. And so Thomas said Penny would be really good at that. So I went and met him, and I became his first agent in the country. And so I built a network of 650 agents. And it was just as email was becoming prevalent. I had a little thing under the stairs, a desk, and I could do it around the children and work all the hours that God sent once they were in bed. And actually Hannah, by that time she was about 3, and sometimes she came out with me to people's houses and I would show her playing on something. And I would do presentations in schools. But what I learnt there was the power of remote working. I learnt the power of building a network, and I learnt the power of things like I created a training. I used to every Saturday go up to Richmond, and anybody who wanted to recruit an agent would send them down there, and I would train them for them. And I ended up creating, doing a PowerPoint with a voiceover and creating a sort of a 4-hour CD training disc. And so that could be sent out to agents and they could use it. So I learnt that skill. And then email came in. We all had our funny numbers for the length of email. I had a CompuServe address. So I ended up creating a network of email network with my the distributor, these people. So I learnt a lot then. And then TJ was born. And when I was pregnant with him, it was physically impossible to really lug this really heavy computer around and everything. And I started getting tired. And PC World come onto the market at that stage. And what I started to find out, which was really sad, is that people would have this person in to do a demonstration free, and then they'd go and buy their PC from PC World. And that's how cruel consumers are. They don't have a lot of morality, do they? And at the end of the day, it was all about price. And Packard Bell was selling a computer similar to the Compaq, and it just became so... I was pregnant with TJ, and I just said, actually, I think I'm going to pass my network over now. And I gave it back to them. And so then I gave birth to TJ, and when TJ was 6 months old, on February the 7th, my husband by then was in the e-commerce world, and he said to me... he was talking all about e-commerce and the internet and websites and everything. And I said, I don't see this as being exciting. But what I see as exciting about the internet is individuals being connected across the world and the opportunity for the growth of home working. And what I had experienced as a home worker was that I could be a great mum and a great wife and still earn a living. So I said, wouldn't it be amazing to create a network online for home workers where they could talk to one another, inspire one another, share knowledge with each other, even trade with one another across the world? And he said, that's a really good idea. So that was the birth of Ecademy. Mm-hmm. And it was born from totally altruistic little thing I could do from home. Wouldn't it be nice to support other people like me to learn how to do this? And so we registered a name, Ecademy, which Thomas came up with, and I talked about it to someone, and about 6 weeks after I'd registered the website, and he said, I'd like to put £250,000 into that idea. And I went, holy, whatever. Really? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, how much of the business do you want? And he said, 50%. So I went, all right then. And I said, on the proviso of, I don't want an executive position because I don't want to be answerable to anyone. I'll only work around the children. I don't want to have a nanny. So I want to continue my belief system around being a great mummy. And he said, that's fine. And so it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew, until we were in 200 countries, 650,000 members. And it was fantastic. And members paid £10 a month to join. And LinkedIn started in 2004. 2002. So we started in 98. LinkedIn 4 years later, Facebook 6 years later, Twitter 8 years later. And I embraced them, and we taught members how to use these other systems because we just saw ourselves as a hub to help them. And people used to say, wait a minute, you're sending our attention over to other networks. And I say, well, that's all right, because I naively believed that people had a loyalty to a home and a sense of belonging to a community that cared about them. And we visited about 50 countries meeting members around the world. And we weren't wealthy on the back of this. We put a lot of money back into it.
Oh, right, yeah.
but loyalty didn't exist.
When did you sell the company?
We sold the company last year.
Last year.
So for about...
Who did you sell it to, Penny?
I sold it to a gentleman who built an insurance company in Wales. But what's was really tough was I learnt the whole... Well, what we're seeing now with... Blockbusters, all the retailers. This is, the internet is wonderful, but it is also hugely disruptive. And the internet was wonderful, but it was also hugely disruptive because around 2005, everybody expected everything for free. And the consumer, the public, do not understand that everything costs. And, I really believe in the freemium model, but ultimately people have to start learning. They need to, even if it's a micropayment, pay for something. And so from 2007, Thomas and I sold our family home. I worked for free in my children's school to keep them at school, and we wanted to keep this community going, and we funded it. And I earned money outside of Academy, public speaking and consulting, to keep Academy going, because I really didn't want to let it go, because we had so many members that really were friends with one across the world, and we ended up saying, right, we need to find a buyer and take this off our hands because it was going to kill us. And we achieved that last year. So 14 and a half years later.
Wow. Quite a journey anyway. In 2011 you wrote the Manifesto for Digital Business. What was that about?
Well, I think it's a cause, that. And I think what you find in any causes that are created, whether it's on abuse or anything, they usually stem from pain. That I've experienced some pain, I don't want other people to experience it. Or if they are experiencing pain, I want them to go somewhere and have someone that cares. And in 2009, I wrote my book, Know Me, Like Me, Follow Me. And that was really to help people to understand the journey of getting known and liked and followed and what it means to business people. And the Minister for Business at the time, Mark Prisk, read the book and asked me to come in and said, look, we know that digital is really important in the way that we support our small businesses around the country. And Chamber of Commerce and the FSB and the CBI and all these amazing institutions that support businesses across the country, they're not supporting them digitally. They're on the street, they're on the ground, but they haven't set up communities online. And he recognised that we'd set up a really powerful community supporting members, and he wanted some of that thought process. And so he introduced me to some think tanks inside government, which is a really big step change for me, because at that time I was stuck. I wasn't Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn, and I wasn't regarded and respected like those machines were that were funded by £2.3 billion worth of investment. But I wasn't the chamber, I wasn't the old institutes that were established. So I was in this little void, and it was a lonely place to be, a very lonely place to be, and I couldn't attach myself to an industry. Do you know what I mean? I was furrowing my own pathway. So to suddenly find myself sitting in think tanks with director generals and things of these was oh God, have I finally arrived somewhere where I can anchor myself? And when I sat in these rooms, with huge respect for all these people, it became really obvious that none of them had a digital agenda for their businesses. And they knew amazing knowledge of accounting and marketing and sales and those skills, but none of them felt comfortable with this subject of social and going social. And going social doesn't happen in a marketing department. Going social happens at a leadership level. A bit like saying to you, if you've never been to a pub, how do you know the dynamics of a pub? Going social has to happen at that leader level. And I likened it in this meetings to, I remember in 1983, coming into business, and everywhere was these posters saying customer is king and this lion's head saying customer is king. And as I walked around the departments and I thought, do you like customers? And the people in the warehouse would say, no, the customer's an arsehole. Well, do you like customers? No, the only place customer was king was in the customer service department. And so, because those two people there were hired to be lovely people that cared about the customer. And it's the same now in going social. People say, oh, we've gone social because they've got two people tweeting in a marketing department, but the business hasn't gone social. They haven't decided to really, truly engage and build community around them. So I said we need to do a manifesto for Digital Business Britain, and I wrote it, and Mark Prisk supported it. And out of that, I made 8 pledges around ethics and values and education and skills, and etc. And I thought we've got to create an on-the-ground sustainable solution to small businesses for them to embed skills inside their business. And there was no qualification, no national qualification. So I thought, what about these born digital kids? They're amazing. You know, they've been born into an environment where digital skills isn't a problem to them, but they understand the connection of connecting unconditionally. So the greatest friend in life is someone who loves you unconditionally. The greatest parent in life is someone who loves you unconditionally, where they're not loving you on condition that you are this person. That's how kids connect. They connect freely because they're not had to connect to make a transaction because their parents are paying for their food. So they've learnt a culture that we don't know, we weren't grown up in. And I think the greatest businesses are those that have an unconditional relationship with their customers, suppliers, stakeholders and employers. So
is this where the idea of digital youth academy came from?
So I think, why don't we start training the born digital youth and embed them into businesses through an apprenticeship scheme? And I created an apprenticeship scheme, got funding for it, whole new apprenticeship framework, spent £500,000 on this, and gave birth to the Digital Youth Academy, which now is the model is to license it through colleges, train colleges and license it. And we also have a youth community where these young people can come in and start talking to one another, hope soon all over the world as we license it globally, and start building their business relationship based on their social values of, I want to care for you.
If you're interested in watching the video content of this interview and many others, or interested in learning from world leaders and teachers, go to www.thebestyou.online.
And is this aimed at business? It's aimed obviously at business people employing the youth, but it's also aimed at the possibility of them becoming entrepreneurs themselves.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of them will.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of them will. But at the end of the year of their apprenticeship, they'll have a qualification and a set of skills that will enable them to make that choice, either to stay in employment or start their own business.
Explain to me the process of training. What is it they learn? How does it work?
Well, we've actually got a number of qualifications now. So an apprenticeship relies on employment. You know, like you're not an apprentice in a plumber or a carpenter unless you're employed by them. So it relies on you saying, I want to take this young person in. And as soon as that happens, they are now an apprentice, which means you get access to free training for them, which we've put into an e-learning portal. So you don't have to give them the skills because you might not know the skills for SEO and Google Analytics and how to use LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Google+. So they get the skills. They get paid a minimum wage of £2.65 an hour by you. And they work for 30 hours a week for you minimum. So that's around that. So that's £95 a week it costs you to hire them. Your obligation, you don't have to pay any national insurance or PAY, and your obligation environment. So they're bringing to you their skills of connecting and their digital skills and their young understanding of maybe, why don't you do it this way? And you're bringing to them the commercial skills that you have so that they can create that bridge between the two. And they work for you for a year. But we've also developed qualifications where a youth, what's called the Not in Education, Employment and Training, the NEETs in this country, where there are 1 million of them, can go on a 13-week programme in college to give them employability skills, which allows the college to start recruiting from that point, saying we've got 40 children on this programme in 13 weeks. Local businesses, you could flag to have one of these, and we've got a 2-day course that the employer can go on for 2 days to learn enough so they feel they can manage that young person. So we've got a number of qualifications, and we launched in the House of Lords last year on October the 11th, so it's really new. So we've got 11 colleges now licensed to deliver that around the country, and from Liverpool down to Guildford is our most south, but we're hopefully about to start working through Bath College and go west and go north. And we've started to get international interest, so in the next couple of months we'll license somebody in Australia, and because we want to really create a youth community around the world that gives young people around the world a chance to have a voice in business. Because what I noticed was that young people were being patronised by business. They were saying, well, come on board, we'll give you a chance. But what Thomas, actually, my husband, identified was that this culture of going online and being social, you have to be open, you have to be random, and you have to be supportive to people. That's a network thinking culture. You're open to everything around you, random in the way that you'll consider people and conversations, and supportive in the way that you seek to support others. That's the culture of being a friend online. But the business people come from being closed, selective, and controlling. So they come from from different opposite directions. So there's a mindset shift that you have to go through from being closed to becoming open. So closed is more task-driven, open is more relationship-driven. Become less selective, so not so driven by I'm only meeting you if you achieve this for me, to being more random, and rather than controlling all the time, being more supportive. So if you get somebody into that mindset and you say, right, in this meeting you go into, or when you're online, try and be a bit more open, random and supportive, because you create more trust. And you create a culture around you where people are attracted towards you as a person and an organisation. So we're wanting to create this cultural shift towards a mindset that if we get young people into organisations, we think there's more chance of that.
And this training, what's your objectives as far as the amount of people you want to train? I mean, within the next year, 2 years?
OK, well, we've put a stake in the ground of 1,000 in the first year. There's definitely funding from government for that. So the government, through the college, will fund that training. The government's really committed to getting young people into meaningful apprenticeships, they call them, and digital is meaningful. So a minimum of 1,000 this year. If I did 1,000, I'd be thrilled. That's great. If I did a lot more than that, I'd be overwhelmed because, we've got a lot of kids that need jobs and need jobs that put them on a career path.
My problem as a businessman is that I find it very difficult, I'm not saying impossible. Where do I find apprentices? Because I hear the government talking about it, and I come up with all these systems. Where do I find one?
Yeah,
because
no, you're absolutely right. And when I do a launch, and when we launch, say we launch at Liverpool or whatever, the Chamber of Commerce, the FSB, BNI networks, they mail their members for us and say, come along and hear Penny talk. And my opening remark to them is, how many people in this room have a relationship with your FE college? You'd be lucky if 2 people out of 100 have. We have not been programmed to consider a college as the centre of a community in our country. But colleges are actually giving birth to the future employers and the skills that we need as employers. And so I'm becoming a little bit of a ambassador for apprenticeships in general. And so my opening at a launch is, I'm here to talk to you about digital, but you've got to consider the responsibility you have as an employer to nurture the relationship and create this bridge between the two. But there are barriers to it, barriers to actually being aware of it, but also barriers to the skills within the college, because the college, they pay a certain amount of money, and those employer engagement teams that go out into industry, they need a set of strong skills to be able to gain the trust of an employer that this is a good source of recruitment, that they're not going to send me the wrong type of person, like a recruitment agency. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of work, I think, in this country to be done on employer engagement between the college and the industry, and I'm having meetings with people about that. But earlier on, I mentioned to you, not necessarily in this interview, but when we were chatting earlier, that my role is to focus this year. And you know what it's like? You sort of open a door, or you open the lid of a treasure trove, and you think, I'm going to work on this, and then you see all these other related issues, and you have to be careful that you don't try and solve too many things in one go.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And so I see myself now on a journey with those things.
My thoughts are that when it comes down to, we were talking about your experiences at school, and I've come through. So this situation with many other people I've interviewed is that their memories from schools aren't the best. What are your thoughts regarding kids and how they're coming out of school, and how schools and universities, and how prepared or unprepared are they for the real world society?
Well, I can only make a generalistic comment because there are major exceptions, and I've been into some education environments that are just mind-blowing, that it make you cry and think, God, I wish I could go back to my childhood. This is just so incredible now. And particularly the FE sector that I'm in, when I go into some of these colleges, I think this is incredible. If businesses went into these colleges and saw the way they were now, they would want to work together with them. So I make a generalistic comment. If here I want to provide some negative commentary, I suppose, about some things that can be improved. So schools have to, I talked about being open, random and supportive. Children now, sadly or inevitably, expect a different relationship with their teacher. They're online, they can talk to anybody. They can tweet celebrities, and they have a conversation going. And we want to say, respect your elders and do as I say, and etc. But children they don't want to live in that world anymore, rightly or wrongly. So unfortunately, the respect between the teacher and the student has broken down. And we hear how hard teachers are finding it to teach crowd control children in classroom. So you have to say, well, where does the fault lie? Does the fault lie with children at home and not being taught respect, or does it lie within the school? Now, I don't know where the fault lies, and I'm not here to point accusing fingers, but unfortunately, the solution has to lie within the educational institutions to adapt, because we can't get to every parent, and we can't change the fact that so many parents are working now and they're exhausted when they get home and their children are latchkey kids, and that the kids spend too much time on the internet. These are conditions we can't change.
Yeah.
So the only way we can change is for the education environments to start adapting to the way that children now want to be treated. And children at a very young age want to feel empowered themselves to make choices. So there are some... and if they switch off, they switch off. They just switch off. I was at my son's parents' evening last night. Now, my kids have been privileged with their education. My husband and I have literally killed ourselves to be able to afford to send our children to the schools they've gone to. And we haven't chosen posh schools. We've chosen nice schools in an area where we know there'll be small class sizes and things. And out of all the teachers I met last night, there was one teacher that I thought, there's no way TJ is going to be able to learn from that teacher. He is such a command and control. And expecting not to have to inspire, just saying, I'm telling you this, you need to learn it. And it was so obvious. So I then looked at his mock results, and his worst mock result was this teacher that I'd just met. Whereas the other teachers, you could sense that there was this partnership formed between the two, and an agreement between the two, and they knew that they had to inspire children and allow children to ask the why question. So teachers are under a lot of pressure, and they have to change the culture of teaching in those environments. And it is happening. I mean, you may have heard of studio schools that are being formed. Hackney College have got one, for example, that starts at 14. So kids that are not thriving in an academic environment, in the traditional school environments, can now choose at 14 a vocational route. So can start at 14 thinking, I'm only interested in technology, I'm only interested in this, and start at 14 trimming down their choices, which we don't tend to do that until we go to university in a traditional thing. So I think education is shifting, and I think your question is right, and it would be wrong of us to not realise that the educational system is aware of it as well. We're not the wise ones sitting on the outside. They know, government knows, they all know that we're having to go through a shift, but it's very hard to change curriculum, change education, this is a hard journey to go on. It's
a very hard journey. The problem is that technology is advancing at, phenomenal speed. I mean, what is now wasn't there 5-6 years ago. There was no Amazons, there was no Facebooks. I mean, it's a completely different world. And, I mean, education has to adapt to the times.
And they are, but it just takes a while. Yeah. I really think they are.
My concern is with the, with making sure at least that, when kids leave schools or universities, at least they have the basic presentation, communication skills in order to go and interview for a job or a
and
position.
That is lacking.
Yeah.
It is really lacking. And there is a lot of money being poured into employability skills, but it does have to happen much earlier than 16 when the shit really hits the fan. And if you've lost a kid by 16, it's hard to get them back in. And so it is happening. And there's fantastic groups, like there's the Gazelle group run by a guy called an ex-principal of a college called Finton Donoghue, and he's wanting to build, and he's got about £5 million worth of money being brought together to build entrepreneurial colleges. So you go to a college to learn to be an entrepreneur, and he's working with Babson College in New York on principles that they have there. So with Len Schlesinger or something, I can never pronounce his name, who's a sort of known as a real thought leader in this sector.
I was actually going to ask you, Penny, who inspires you now?
Oh, I find that question so hard because I don't read. I'm terrible, which is one of the reasons I like Twitter, I think, because I can just about cope with 140 characters. Who inspires me? My husband, hugely. He really is, he's very ahead in his mind about the world. He's incredible, actually, so he inspires me. My business partner, Darren Sherlaw, really inspires me because he's a good man and he's a very good businessman. Seth Godin, Chris Brogan, there's a guy called Chris Brogan, who's quite good online. Brian Solis, there's some really interesting people that understand the cultural shift we're going through rather than just the technology shift. That inspires me. And I would say you and the content that you provide, there's some great people there as well.
Thank you very much. What would you like to teach others?
Okay, so we all have our commercial message to the world, because otherwise people would think that we're all we live in woo-woo world. But I think I call my driver connecting hearts. And that's what I want to do, really. I think when I created the Academy, I created it at a very energetic level, which some people felt it and others didn't. But it was quite interesting how many did feel it. And I think they really recognised the emotional intent inside this business community that I put into it. And I think that work has taken over our lives now. Very few of us work to live. Most of us are living to work. And therefore, if you're not in an environment where you're not emotionally attached to it, it's really hard to get through each day. And so I think finding your own higher purpose is really important in business. And for me, when I get a group of people together or when I'm speaking on stage, I want people to learn to connect at heart level rather than just at cerebral level. And when you connect at heart level, I think you innovate, you just have a much better life because you're open to new things and people, and I think you then really connect with your purpose in life.
What do you think the best assets are? I mean, when it comes down to, I don't know, becoming a businessman or businesswoman or working, what do you think the best assets are nowadays, the way the world is?
We are so connected now, and the transparency is not going to go away. It's going to increase. It's not, I think people are thinking, can we regulate transparency and privacy? And it's just going to be impossible to. And therefore, in my last page of my book, I talk about the fact that I love this new world because ultimately the good rises to the top. I think if you play it forward in 50 years, 100 years, the good will be the people with the money, because the bad, it'll be those people who haven't got morality will get too easily shown up. So I think that we will start shifting towards a better world. And I know that's idealistic, but it's my dream and I can see it happening. And I saw it happening inside the ecosystem of the Academy. The good did rise to the top. So in terms of assets, I think that whole being driven by liking people and building relationships and what I would call a social capital in our lives rather than just financial and human capital is going to become an asset that people need to really build on. And when I go into schools and speaking skills, I try and teach children the importance and the joy of building a network around them of people that really like them and that they support and care for. So I think social capital will become a really critical asset to businesses. And also understanding what your own thought leadership is and building IP around that. Because I love the saying, give away your knowledge, but sell your expertise. I think that's a really clever way of explaining what's happening now in the world. And you first of all got to know what your knowledge is. And if I said to anybody, what do you sell? They find that really easy. If I said to them, what knowledge do you have? What do you want to be known for? They find that level really difficult. And we're moving away from a transactional world of being in a marketplace where we can just sell our goods. It's about individuals having knowledge that they're willing to share and what is the expertise that sits behind that. So all individuals, all companies are going to have this higher level of purpose and understanding and build communities around them. And if they know the IP that they can create as an asset in that, then they can build out from the IP and can still build an incredibly valuable shareholding organisation, but it's based on doing good as well as selling.
No, you're absolutely right. And I came across that with when you were mentioning Darren Shirlaws.
Yeah.
And if you look at the biggest companies now, it's all about the actual culture, the asset. That's where the real asset
Absolutely.
is. It's the emotional feeling experience you get when you buy and interact with these companies.
Yeah, it is.
You know, Amazon. You know, there's an emotion there, and I don't think people have valued that
emotional connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting. And when you look at sort of the quadrant of companies, you've got retailers, you've got people that have built great brands and trade on their brand, you know, like Harley Davidson and that emotional brand. You've got retailers, and then you've got these people that have created this gamification, this feeling of the virtual world, and have built community around that. And then you've got people that have built community, and ultimately, the ultimate people that have built community, I suppose, are the religious people or charities. But they don't know how to monetize that. And it was interesting meeting John Bird from the Big Issue charity, because he's built a feeling and a community around the big issue. But he's done it using retail skills and publishing skills. So I think, you know, if I was CEO now of a company, I'd be thinking, okay, I'm in retail, but I've got to build more than just a retail experience, just more than just an e-commerce experience. I have to build a gamification world, I have to build a brand, and I have to build a community. And how am I going to do that? And they can only do that if they learn to go social.
Yeah. Penny, my last question. What would you like your legacy to be?
That business people are more collaborative and supportive and loving towards one another.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for watching Inspiring People. Thank you.
For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co.